process here in the presentation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Wally Mead. I'm a senior program manager with Microsoft. Been around for 19 years. Been working with SMS/configuration manager for 17 of those 19 years. So the two big goals we want to talk about today are really how do you go from the current product that we have today, Configuration Manager 2007, and how do you migrate over to what that new product is we've been talking about all week, which is Configuration Manager 2012. So in my other three presentations I gave, you guys saw some of the new features of the product. We looked at infrastructure and deployment and how you deploy a brand new environment. We looked a little bit of application model before we ran out of time. And then today we want to take that a step further. So you've seen some of the feature areas. You've been down in the hands-on labs. You've played around with some of those, hopefully. And now, how do you go from where you are to where you want to be? So that's what really we're going to talk about today. And the last couple of slides are what can you do today to start preparing for this new product when it releases later on this year. So first off, a little terminology. So we're all on the same wavelength here. Content, I've referred to content in all my presentations. Content are the package binaries you're going to make available to your end users, to the clients. So packages, applications, software update packages, OS deployment images, boot images, and so on. That's content. So content are the files that the client computers need to have access to. Objects. Objects are generally the things that you're going to create in the console. You're going to create an application, you're going to create a package, you're going to create a software update group, you're going to create a deployment, you're going to create a DCM or configuration item, configuration baseline. So it's the metadata about those physical files that you're creating for the content. Server settings, site roles that you have configured in your environment, the properties of those site system roles, and so on. And then lastly, there's client information. Buying the client GUID, so the unique client identifier, the inventory information for the client, its status information, its current state information for patch compliance and DCM compliance, and so on. So those are the four different type of things you need to think about in your migration process. So as you're going through migration planning and you're moving from your current product to the new product, there's four different areas, those four areas we just looked at. First off, you got to get clients migrated over. And how are you going to get your clients from the old technology over the new technology? When you migrate clients, you obviously want to have information for those clients to utilize. So you're going to have software you're going to deploy. You're going to have compliance information you need to make sure you're validated on. You're going to have software updates that have to be deployed. So you have a bunch of different objects you have to make available to your clients as you migrate them over. You need to gather information about your clients so you can create collections, so you can validate your compliance, you can run your reports and tell management, yes, you are within compliance of certain updates or your desired configuration, or you're not. And then lastly, it all revolves around a server infrastructure. Clients can't do anything without the appropriate server infrastructure, so you have to have that server infrastructure in place. So how do you get there from where you are today? So first off, looking at those four different quadrants. Server migration. There's, in the current product, when you guys migrated from SMS 2003 to Configuration Manager 2007, there were two different ways for you guys to migrate. You could do an in-place upgrade, or you could do a side-by-side upgrade. So in-place upgrade was very good if you wanted to keep your existing hardware, you wanted to keep all the existing information you had in your site database, all the packages, all the advertisements, all the software update stuff, all your hardware inventory type data. You want to keep what you have. In-place upgrade is great. We polled our TAP customers when we were working on this migration process and asked them how they did their migration or upgrade from SMS 2003 to Config Man 2007, and more than half of them said even though in-place upgrade was there, they did a side-by-side. So they kept their 2003 environment, they set up a brand new 2007 environment, so it was brand new. They gave them the opportunity of getting rid of old packages, old collections that older administrators or former administrators had created that had never been cleaned up. So it gave them basically a green field to start with. And they just recreated stuff they wanted to do, that they wanted to migrate over, and reinstalled the clients, got new information. Side-by-side is also good for hardware refresh. So you've had your 5-year, 3-year cycle for hardware. You got brand new hardware. You were 32-bit before. Now you want to be 64-bit hardware or just whatever the new hardware is. And so you got side-by-side works very well for that. So more than half of our TAP customers did that process. So it's just a matter of, in that environment, you had your choice what you wanted to do. To set the bar right away, there is no in-place upgrade from ConfigMan 2007 to ConfigMan 2012. It is not an upgrade, it's a migration. You're doing a side-by-side migration. So that's the first thing to lay the ground. However, unlike this upgrade process, the side-by-side, where we from the product group gave you no tools to move your client data, to move those objects over from old environment to new environment, we now give you a migration process that will help you very easily migrate over the information that you choose that you want to migrate from your old infrastructure to your new infrastructure. And that's what we'll concentrate on in this presentation. Deployment objects. So again, in the 2003 to 2007 migration, we from the product group gave you nothing to move those objects over. So you either had to recreate them, you had to go to some third-party source, maybe in a community source, or actually somebody from MCS, Microsoft Consulting Services, wrote a copy SMS OBJ tool to help migrate stuff over. Unsupported by the product group, so if it didn't work, that was nothing on our end, because if you're doing side-by-side, you're on your own. The only way we had for you to move your objects over from an old environment to new environment was in a side-by-side, was set up your existing, set up a brand new 2007, upgrade your 2003 environment to 2007, attach your new one as a child of the old one, so it would replicate down all the objects, collections, advertisements, and so on. Once you got it all replicated down, you broke the parent-child relationship, let it clean itself up. Then you reverse that, took your old environment, made it a child of the new environment, so it replicated up all the hardware inventory type data from your clients. So you could do that funky way of getting around it, and you could move stuff over. But it wasn't a pick and choose, everything got replicated over. And that was the only way you could do so from the product group. Now we're going to give you tools, built-in tools in the product to migrate that stuff over for you. Inventory and compliance data, you kept it if you did the in-place upgrade, or if you did that side-by-side with the alternating parent-child relationships that I mentioned. You would keep your old inventory data. In the new environment, we're not keeping anything because it's side-by-side. So we're not going to migrate over your inventory, your compliance data from your 2007 environment over your new 2012 environment. We'll migrate the objects over, but clients are going to get reinstalled. They're going to generate brand new hardware inventory, brand new software inventory. They'll get new compliance state off of your software update deployments you have, or your compliance settings, your configuration items and baselines that you generate. And lastly is clients. When you migrated from SMS 2003 to ConfigMan 2007, we told you that you could upgrade your clients any way you wanted to. Most people would use software distribution because of the fact that you got to create advertisements. You could control when those clients got upgraded. So you could advertise to a collection that would upgrade clients overnight. So you were in control of the entire process. We actually used to automatically upgrade clients back in the SMS 2.0 days, and you guys all got mad at us because every time you installed a new service pack, the next morning, within an hour, all 10,000 of your clients all tried to upgrade at the same time and flooded your network. So y'all got mad at us. You told us to get rid of the automatic upgrade, so we did. So now it's admin controlled. So software distribution, the most popular. You could do client push. You could do software update point client install for clients, manual, any different method you wanted to. So you had a lot of different choices for how you wanted to upgrade your clients. Okay, so that's kind of the background. This is a screenshot of what the migration homepage looks like. And this, I call it a scorecard. And we'll see this as we go through the demos. It'll change. But we give you it in the admin console, so you're in the administration workspace. The very bottom node is migration. We'll give you a scorecard or report of what your current migration process looks like. So the upper left quadrant shows you in statistical numbers what your site hierarchy looks like from the ConfigMan 2007 environment, what your central site name is, and how many child primary sites it has. Below that, lower left, is your object migration. Here's all the objects we discovered in your ConfigMan 2007 environment that could potentially be migrated over to Configuration Manager 2012. How many we discovered, how many you've excluded from migration, how many have already been migrated, and how many are yet to be migrated. Upper right was migration jobs. Migration jobs are the commands that say, take these objects from ConfigMan 2007 and create them over in my ConfigMan 2012 environment. How many jobs you've created, how many have run successfully, how many have failed. And then on the lower right is your client count. The total number of clients that you had in your 2007 environment, how many have been excluded from migration, how many have already been migrated over to 2012. So we'll constantly update this as you go through your migration process. So in one spot, you can go and look and see exactly where you are in your migration process. And I'll show you this to you in the live demos coming up. Oh, by the way, my goal is that I actually complete the slides and complete all the demos today in this presentation. So we'll look forward to that. So no questions. But I don't have to bother this guy about snacks. He already brought me some, so I appreciate that. So our goals with migration are assist you with the migration of objects. Again, we never did that in 2003 to 2007. We now think we have a very good story on how you can do that migration, how you can get your objects migrated over. Assist you with the migration of clients. Really, it's you upgrade clients using any of the methods you used before. Whatever method you like to use, you can still use those same methods to upgrade your clients, but we'll show you what the status is on that process. Minimize your WAN impact. What that means is there's going to be a period of time where you're going to have both environments running side by side. So it's not going to be an overnight migration process for most people. Maybe some of you are smaller, you can get it done over a weekend. But most people, it's going to be months that you're working in this migration process. So you're going to still be managing your 2007 environment for a period of time. As you're migrating over your packages from 2007 to 2012, there's going to be a period of time where those packages, that source content, is not going to be residing on 2012 distribution points. So what we're going to allow you to do is to have your 2012 clients that receive a deployment for a package that has content on a 2007 DP to use that 2007 DP for that content. So that you don't have to migrate over your content from old DP to new DP. And then when you're all done with the migration, you may be able to upgrade that DP from 2007 to 2012. And an upgrade of a DP leaves all the content there, so you don't have to redistribute it across the wire. And I'll talk about that in the slides as well. We want to assist you with the flattening of the hierarchy. We told you in other presentations, we're flattening our hierarchy now. And how we're going to assist you is we're going to force you to do so. You don't really have a choice. Again, one CAS, one tier of primary sites. That's as low as you go unless you want a tier of secondary sites below that. So no more parent-child relationships between primary sites. That goes away. So the migration process is going to help you with that, and that I'll show you in the slides how you can map multiple primary sites from 2007 into one hierarchy in 2012. And as you've heard in other presentations, global data replication, all those migrated objects replicate down to all your primary sites. So very, very efficient for you. And then reuse your x64 hardware. We've told you before that for the most part, everything in ConfigMan 2012 is 64-bit, with the exception of 32-bit DPs, and we still do support 32-bit clients. We're native 64-bit as an application, and we do have a native 64-bit client infrastructure now as well, but we also support 32-bit clients. So we want to be able to take your investment in your 64-bit hardware you have today, and to be able to reuse that for Configuration Manager 2012. A group within Microsoft IT wrote a tool called the P2V migration tool that will help you reutilize that same hardware by going from physical to virtual environments. It is part of this migration process. And we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. Okay, so your migration process. First thing you have to do is you have to plan to make sure you're ready to migrate. Of course, I mentioned it before, you guys all test things out. You do your proof of concepts, you do your lab deployments and test things out to make sure everything works great. So we know you're going to do that. The baseline for Configuration Manager 2007 is Service Pack 2. We will not migrate from anything less than ConfigMan 2007 Service Pack 2. It will not work from ConfigMan 2007 Service Pack 1, and certainly not from an SMS 2003 environment, if any of you are still there. It's a flatten and reload. You're starting all over again. So our baseline is ConfigMan 2007 Service Pack 2. We don't care about the R2 add-on. We don't care about the R3 add-on. Those are completely immaterial. It's ConfigMan 2007 Service Pack 2. Then you have to set up a ConfigMan 2012 environment. I mentioned this is side by side. So you have your existing ConfigMan 2007 Service Pack 2 environment, and now you set up a brand new ConfigMan 2012 environment. And as we mentioned, everything is 64-bit. So you have your 64-bit Windows Server 2008. It doesn't have to be R2, but you probably want to use R2. SQL Server 2008, 64-bit, and you get that all configured. Currently in Beta 1 is SQL 2008 Service Pack 1 with cumulative update 10 or above. We will support SQL 2008 Service Pack 2 and SQL 2008 R2 by the time we release the product. But if you're testing in beta 2, it has to be SQL 2008 Service Pack 1, CU10, or above. And again, 64-bit. Okay, so once you know where you can be, do some migration, then you start your deployment. So you set up your initial ConfigMan 2012 environment. So you may have a CAS, you don't have to, but you may determine you have multiple primaries, you need a central administration site, set up your X number of primary sites you want to have in that hierarchy. You have to make sure that you configure a software update point. If you're using a software update point in 2007 and you want to migrate over your update lists and your deployment packages and so on from 2007 over to 2012, you have to pre-install the software update point and do your synchronization of the metadata in 2012. We will not migrate over software update objects from 2007 unless the metadata already exists in 2012. So that means both sites you set up WSUS, both sites you set that WSUS box up as a software update point, and you synchronize from the same source. So you have the exact same metadata. Then you can go ahead and migrate over your update list to software update groups, your deployment packages to deployments, packages and deployments, and so on. But that is a requirement. Otherwise, your software update objects will not migrate. You could always set up your SUP later on, do your synchronization, and go back and re-migrate over your software update objects if you forget to do that. Set up your server roles. So set up the appropriate roles that you need in Configuration Manager 2012. For the most part, whatever roles you have in 2007, you probably want those same roles in 2012. A couple of exceptions are reporting points. They go away. So there are no more reporting points in Configuration Manager 2012. It's now a reporting services point. So I've mentioned before, if you haven't already been playing with SRS integration, start playing with it in the ConfigMan 2007 R2 and R3 add-ons. They support SRS integration. So start getting familiar with it because that's the only way you're going to report. You may not need a server locator point. If you're in my overview presentation on Tuesday, I showed you Active Directory Forest Discovery. One of the features of Active Directory Forest Discovery is the ability of publishing your site's data into another forest where clients reside. So if you do that, then you won't necessarily need a server locator point anymore. And in fact, in the RTM of the product, the SLP is going away from ConfigMan 2012. And the functionality for doing that SLP functions will be built into the management point. So if you still have workgroup-based clients or other forests you don't want to publish to, you'll still need an SLP for beta 2, but that functionality will be there in the management point in the RTM of the product. So set up whatever roles you need. And then very importantly, make sure that things are working fine in your new environment before you start your migration. There's no sense in you migrating over 10,000 clients from ConfigMan 2007 over to ConfigMan 2012 when your existing 2012 clients can't talk to the management point. Well, if the existing 2012 clients can't talk to your MP, what makes you think your migrated clients are going to talk to your MP? So make sure you get your infrastructure working first and then do your migration. So that's one of the things we do whenever we do a tap visit. We always get some brand new clients installed, verify functionality. We set our heartbeat discovery down to daily. We set hardware inventory down to daily. So we get a lot of data over a couple-day period of time just so we're exercising and making sure that things are working properly. Then once we know everything's working well, I can do a software deployment. Then I go ahead and scale the discovery methods and inventory methods back to the way I want. But always verify your new functionality works, your new environment works before you start adding old stuff over to it, migration. Then lastly, you do your migration process. So you enable distribution point sharing so that you can have 2012 clients getting content from 2007 DPs if you want that feature. You migrate over the objects you want, migrate over the clients you want, and then upgrade those distribution points. So again, it just removes them from the old database, adds them to the new database, and the content stays there so you don't have to redeploy the content over the wire. When you're all done, you cancel the mapping between those sites, and then you uninstall your old 2007 environment. And then he says rinse and repeat here. You just go through that for each of the different sites in your hierarchy, each of the different hierarchies you have that you want to migrate over. Because you may have multiple hierarchies in your environment you have to migrate as well. Okay, so that's the general process flow. Oh, we're not ready for a demo yet. Okay, I was going to switch over to demo, but we're not there. Okay, so The first step in your process after you validated that you got 2007 SP2 and you got your brand new 2012 environment is you set up your mapping between the central site and central site. So in essence, what you do down in the orange in the lower right is you go to your client access point, yes, your central administration site server, the CAS in 2012, and you point to your 2007 central site server. So you set up a mapping between those two central sites. What that's going to do then, the ConfigMan 2012 site server is going to connect up to the 2007 central site server. It's going to query SQL database to find out objects you got in SQL. It's going to query through the SMS provider to find objects that you have as well. So we're going to make a bunch of queries to your 2007 site server to find what your infrastructure looks like as far as sites in your hierarchy, how many clients you got, and what objects you have available for distribution or migration over. So we're going to do this querying process. It's what we call a data gathering process. It is a read-only operation. We do not modify or touch your ConfigMan 2007 database other than the reading of information. So it's a query process only. So you can run this data gathering process as many times as you want to. You can migrate over objects over the same objects numerous times. It will not affect anything in your 2007 environment. So we do a discover process to figure out what you got there that could be applicable for migration over to 2012. Then what you may need to do is configure mappings of multiple primary sites in 2007 over to your 2012 environment. We've mentioned you have a different flatter hierarchy. So in the yellow on the left, you see you have a multiple tier hierarchy between USA primary site, USA Seattle primary site, and then USA San Francisco primary site. You can't have that in 2012. So here you would take those 3 primary sites, map them over to your CAS in 2012. We'll migrate all the objects over that you choose from those sites over to your CAS, and then it will replicate down to EMEA primary site and USA primary site. So you may set up mappings between multiple primary sites in one site over to your new central administration site for that global replication. By default, we're going to go back and query your 2007 site every 4 hours. And the reason we're going to do that is you're still managing your 2007 environment. You're still creating new software distribution packages. You're still creating new software updates. You're making modifications to collections because you're still having to manage those clients that haven't been migrated. So we want to find out any changes that you've made to your old information. So we'll regather that information on a periodic schedule, 4 hours by default, and you can change that, and I'll show you how, so that we can stay up to date with what you got over there. Or anytime you want, you can force us. I know I went and did some stuff over there. Let me go ahead and force data gathering right now so my 2012 environment has the most up-to-date information. Now I can start migration jobs to move information over. So this is the data gathering process to find out what you have so we can figure out what you want to migrate over. Now, once you've done that data gathering process so that you know what objects you have in your existing environment, you then create migration jobs. Migration jobs are basically the commands that say, take these objects from over there and recreate them over into my 2012 environment. So this is the process that recreates those objects over in the new environment. Again, leaving them as existing objects in 2007 unmodified. There's 3 different ways to migrate. You migrate by collection, and we think that's going to be the most popular one. You want to migrate a collection of clients over at a time. Well, before you migrate those clients over, you want to make sure that all those objects that those clients need have been migrated over as well. So when you pick a collection to migrate, we'll show you all the objects that are targeted to that collection. Software distribution packages, advertisements, DCM configuration items and baselines, software updates, OS deployments, etc. We'll show you all those objects that are targeted to that collection. You can then cherry pick and pick and choose which one of those objects you do or don't want to migrate over. And then you migrate over the collection, you migrate over all those objects, and then you do your client migration. So that's migration by collection. The other type of migration job we have is migration by type of object. I don't want to go by collection. I want to move over all my OSD objects. My OSD guys are getting itchy. They want to start doing some work. So I go and do an object type migration. It shows me everything in my list of objects that I can migrate. I pick and choose my OSD objects, let them get migrated over, and then I go create another job for getting all my software distribution packages, or my boundaries, or my asset intelligence customizations. So I can go by object type. And the third type of migration job we have is to re-migrate over objects that have already been migrated before. So I did migrate over a package or a collection for my 2007 environment. I've since modified it in my 2007 environment. I want to re-migrate over those modifications over to the 2012 environment. So that will only show you objects that have been modified in 2007 since the last time they were migrated. So it's a kind of a special migration job. So you pick and choose which ones of those you want. You can create as many migration jobs as you want. I don't think anybody is ever going to say only do everything by one migration job. That'll take a really long time to do. So you're going to pick and choose and go migration job by migration job, and I'll show you how to do this in the console coming up shortly. Okay, so here's a couple of different examples for you. 2007 in yellow, 2012 in red. So you've got your primary site in both sites. You get your environment set up. So in this case, we migrated over an Office 2010 package, which is the metadata only. So now I have the Office 2010 as a package in 2012. I go ahead and have Distribution Manager pick up the source files from my 2007 source location. Because what I want to do is migrate not only the metadata, but also migrate over the content. So it's on a 2012 DP. So I point to that original source location. I get those files. I distribute those files, that content, to a 2012 DP, and now I deploy that application or that package to my clients so they get the Office 2010 content. So this is one way of doing your migration. This is migrating the metadata, migrating over the content, and then deploying that content through 2012, through a 2012 DP. That's one possibility you have. And then you go to the 2012 DP and get your content for the clients. I'll show you momentarily, I don't know why it's not this slide, but I'll show you the shared DP example as well, and how that changes. Here are all the different objects we support migration. Collections. And there are some caveats on collections we'll talk about in the slides. But we migrate collections, advertisements, boundaries. You don't get to pick and choose your boundaries. It's all boundaries or no boundaries we migrate over. Software distribution packages as well as AppV packages, so virtual application packages you've created. Software updates, so your deployment templates, your deployment packages, and your update lists. Operating system, everything for OSD. Task sequences, drivers, driver packages, OS install packages, OS images. DCM, or what we used to call them DCM, configuration items, configuration baselines. Asset intelligence customizations, so custom categories, families, labels, any software you've manually identified over, we can migrate that over. Any hardware requirements that you've generated, we can migrate those over. And software metering rules. So there are those automated system-generated rules or rules that you may have created on your own. So those are the objects that we can migrate over, so it's a pretty complete list. The biggest thing that most people complain about that we don't migrate over are reports. We do not migrate over reports. We don't use that old web reporting solution anymore. We're now using SRS. So the way to get around that is to integrate 2007 with SRS today. So again, in the ConfigMan 2007 R2 and R3 products, set up an SRS environment, do a reporting services point, and then in the wizard there, you can take over your custom reports you've created, migrate them over to SRS. Once they're in SRS in 2007, you would do an export of those reports from SRS into RDL format, take that RDL file over to your ConfigMan 2012 SRS box, and import that RDL file, and you got the reports over. So even though it's not through us, you can still get there. Okay, now distribution points. By default, we don't set up sharing of DPs. We'll keep those two environments separate. However, if you want to share DPs, and I'll show you that in my demos, you go back, and after you've done your initial data gathering process, you select an option that says Share DPs. And then we asked you, are you sure you want to share DPs? That's the dialog box that you see here, and you'll see momentarily in the demo. And once you do that, we do another data gathering process to find your DPs and what content is on those DPs. Once you've done that, there's a couple exclusions, boot images and AppV content. But all your other software distribution packages and software update content and so on can be hosted. And OSD images, just not boot images. So here's that same migration of Office 2010, but now using shared DPs. So we migrate over our Office 2010 metadata from 2007 to 2012. We set up a shared DP environment, and now we deploy the Office 2010 package to our clients that are 2012. The 2012 clients then retrieve that content from the 2007 DP. So what you're saving here is the process of having your 2012 site server going to that source file location, creating that package, and replicating it across the wire, and then dumping it down on a 2012 DP. Your client can just go over to the 2007 DP and get that content. And then once you're all done with that, then you would go ahead and do an upgrade to that DP. Once you've got all that content, all your clients migrated over, you do an upgrade, which I'll show you later on. Okay, so we're going to go to, switch the slides, or switch over to the demos. Hopefully everybody can see that well. Uh-oh, my mouse stopped working. On this laptop, I'll give you a heads up. When the mouse stops working like this, it means that this guy's going to lock up soon. So hopefully it'll last the rest of the demo. So here's my 2007 environment. I'm showing you that just for the fact that you can see that it's a 2007 Service Pack 2 environment, 6487.2000. It does actually have R3 installed on it, but that's, again, completely immaterial. So R3 is installed, but it doesn't matter. All we need is 2007 SP2. I've got some collections here I'm going to migrate over. I'm going to migrate over the ConfigMan clients collection, which has 3 clients in it. I'm also going to migrate over the main building collection, which is an empty collection, but it has 2 sub-collections that have clients in them. I'm going to migrate that over. You can see here's 4 physical packages. Here's 2 virtual packages. I've got some software update lists and deployment templates and so on. I think I have. No, it's still returning lists. I've got some asset intelligence customizations. I've got some OSD stuff. I've got some DCM stuff. So I've got a lot of stuff here that's going to migrate over. And hopefully it's just taking a while to return that. So that's what my source environment looks like. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to my CAS. So here's my 2012 CAS. So here's my administration workspace. Go to the migration node. Here's that scorecard I was telling you about in the migration homepage. And right now it knows nothing. I've not configured a mapping between the 2 environments, so it doesn't know anything at all. So to configure that mapping, I just go up to the Home tab on the ribbon, specify source hierarchy, and then I say my top-level site server I want to query from is called SMS server. We have to get to the SMS provider as well as the SQL server on that computer to discover objects. So you can use the computer account if the computer account from 2012 will be valid to query the 2007 site server, or you can specify a user account. And in my environment, those 2 are in untrusted domains, or untrusted forest. So I can't use the computer account to query, so I have to use a user account. So I'll say to use SMS domain, and then I'll just use administrator. And you guys always feel free to catch me on my typing. So it should say SMS domain /administrator and my super secret password that you guys validated. We don't validate the credentials. We don't validate the password. All we validate is that I mistyped the password twice, the same. That's all we're validating. And hopefully I typed it correctly. We'll find out shortly. And then I can specify for SQL Server to use the same account as I specified for the provider or a different account. And I'll just go ahead and say I want to use the same account. I'll click OK. And this will kick off our initial data gathering process. So it's going to go ahead and start our data gathering process. Depends on how much objects you have in your 2007 environment. This might run for an hour to go ahead and query everything, maybe longer. Just depends on how much stuff you have over there, how much junk you have that you'll need to get rid of. So this may take a while to do your data gathering process. Mine's a fairly small virtual environment, so it's not going to take very long at all. I'll just let it go into completion here. Now, when it gets done here, it's going to go ahead and allow me to share distribution points directly from this console, of this dialog. I can create a migration job directly for here, or I can just close. I'm going to go ahead and click a close and not do any of those other options. Now you can see my scorecard is updated. It says my source site server is SMS server. That's my central site. There's only 1 primary site in the hierarchy. I have 90 objects in my source site that can be migrated over. I've got no migration jobs created, and I've got 3 clients in that source site that can be migrated over. Now what I want to do next is expand migration and go down to active source hierarchy. If my central site in 2007 actually was a central site with child sites below it, then what I could do is set up a mapping from my child primary sites in 2007 over to my CAS here. But I don't have the ability of doing that because I don't have any child sites. It's just a standalone primary site in 2007. But this is where I would go to the site code. TST is my 2007 sites code. and I would set up the mapping of child sites from my central site over to the 2012 environment. But here what I could do is, and we give you some statistics down here, and right now it says distribution points none. It doesn't know about any shared distribution points because I haven't enabled it. I'll enable that momentarily. This says ready for next synchronization or data gathering process. If I go to properties, it tells me here's my sync schedule, hourly up through daily. I can go ahead and configure that. And I can also say force data gathering right now. I can go ahead and specify I want to share distribution points. So go ahead and share DPs. I'll say yes, I want to do that. Click OK. And that's going to force another data gathering process, but this one should go quicker because it does a delta. It's just doing a delta looking for the DPs that are in the 2007 environment and what content they have on them. So it shouldn't take nearly as long to complete this process. And then what will happen is down in the bottom in my details pane, I can now go ahead and click refresh. And I can go ahead and click refresh. And then it will show me my DP. So there's my DP, which the only one I have is my site server. So that's the only distribution point I have is my site server. I don't have a remote DP just because of the number of images I don't want to have up and running. And it says 0 hosted migrated packages. That means there's no content, no packages I've migrated over from 2007 over to 2012 yet that are on this DP. Once I do some migration, then this number will change. And that'll be telling the ConfigMan 2012 clients, hey, if I need any of these X number of packages, I can go get them from this source DP, which is SMS server, which is my 2007 site server. There's nothing else I'm going to do here at this point in time, but you can see up here it says I've configured source parent site code. That would be if I was at a child primary site underneath SMS server, not the central site. Then I can go ahead and see what this parent site was, the hierarchy basically. So that's all I'm going to do for right now. We'll switch back over to slides and we'll come back over here and create migration jobs in a moment. So that's all the harder it is to configure migration. Set up your mapping between central site and central site. Let us do the data gathering. If you want to share DPs, enable that option, do another data gathering process. And now we've discovered all the objects you have that can be migrated. Upgrading distribution points, there's two different ways of doing an upgrade of a DP. There's only one way of doing an upgrade. That's called the automated distribution point upgrade. So once you've successfully migrated over all the objects you want, and you're going to get rid of your 2007 environment, you got migrated over all the clients and all the objects, then you can go ahead and upgrade that DP from 2007 to 2012. And as you know, there's no code, no configuration manager software really running on a DP, so there's no services there. So really what the upgrade does is it just removes it from the 2007 database and adds it to the 2012 database with the package IDs already there. So we already know what content's there, so you don't have to redistribute it. The caveat is, or the caveats are, that to upgrade a DP, it has to be a standalone DP. No other site system roles can be shared on a DP to upgrade it. So you can't be sharing your DP with your management point and upgrade it. You'd have to remove the management point role first. So you can't have any of the roles there. It's a standalone DP. And you have to have enough disk space to be able to do the upgrade. Because of the fact that we have to go from the old package source location to the new single instance store, the content library we have, we're changing how those files are stored in the DP once it becomes a 2012 DP. So we need disk space there to do that migration from old SMS PKG $C$ share over to the SCCM content library. So basically it's going to be double your disk space for a period of time, until you get that migration done and you get rid of the old SMS PKG $C$ share. So those are the two big caveats there. We do not migrate over or upgrade branch DPs. Again, branch DPs are gone in 2012. So this is only for standard distribution points that are standalone. No other roles installed on them. And then if so, then you have this wizard here. You can say upgraded DP. It shows you the disk space considerations. It shows you if you're eligible for an upgrade. In this case, the screenshot says yes. I just go ahead and say, here's the account I want to use to connect up and manage this DP. I click OK, and it does that migration for me. In my case, if I try and upgrade, it's going to say it's not eligible because there's multiple site system roles on it. Because it's not a standalone DP, it's my site server. It's more ConfigMan roles out there running. The manual upgrade process is not really an upgrade process. You basically manually uninstall all your 2007 stuff, and then you add it as a DP in 2012, and you put content out there, either through the console and distribute it over the wire, or you can do the pre-stage content stuff that we support in 2012, which I never got around to showing you in the presentation yesterday, but we do have that support for standard DPs now. Okay, click the button and nothing happened. There we go. Secondary sites and all other system roles, there's no upgrade. There's no upgrade from any other site system role other than a standalone DP. Everything else, you have to uninstall that role and reinstall it. So nothing else is upgraded at all. It's a side-by-side migration. We just give you that ability of saving your WAN for that shared DP scenario and upgrading it over to ConfigMan 2012. All other site system roles, you have to uninstall and then recreate them in the 2012 environment. And as we've said before, we are replacing the Pixie Service Point site system role. It's now a property of a distribution point in 2012. So you don't have to worry about recreating that. You just enable that one option. Client migration. So you migrate clients any way you want to. Software distribution, probably the most popular. Client push, group policy, the software update point client install method, manual install method, operating system deployment, whatever you want. So you migrate however you want to, so you're in complete control as to when those clients get migrated over and how you do that migration process. When we do this migration process, we uninstall the client and we reinstall the 2012 client. And the primary reason for that is in 2007, we're a 32-bit client. And a lot of you guys have 64-bit OSs now that you're running, and we're still running as a 32-bit client there. In that environment, we would now install a native 64-bit client. So we're going to uninstall your old ConfigMan 2007 client and reinstall it as a 2012 client, either 32-bit or 64-bit, depending on your OS that you have underlying. However, we do retain the client's GUID, and we do retain its execution history. So you will not rerun all those advertisements, which are now deployments in 2012. You won't rerun those. We'll keep that history for you. So all you'll be doing is wiping out the client, as far as ConfigMan is concerned, reinstalling the client, keeping the same GUID, keeping the same execution history, and then recreating all your hardware inventory, software update point, software update compliance status, compliance settings status, and so on. So you recreate all that data because it's a brand new client anyway, and you have new SMS DefMoff, et cetera. Now the minimum supported client versions, we no longer support Windows 2000. So both of you out there that, I don't know how many of you are running, hopefully nobody's still running Windows 2000 clients, but we no longer support them. So our minimum platform now is Windows XP Service Pack 3 or Service Pack 2 for 64-bit. So Windows XP Service Pack 2 for 64-bit clients and Windows XP Service Pack 3 for 32-bit clients, and then on up from there. Generally, it's the current Service Pack release and the one prior is generally the way we operate. You're going to recreate your inventory and compliance data because it's a brand new client install. You can have new configuration items, new configuration baselines. You can have new software update lists, now software update groups deployed. Generally the same metadata, but you're going to recreate all that, as well as a new SMS DefMoff likely, unless you did an import. Now, if you want to retain all your old information, in 2007, go ahead and set up the SRS integration and have all your data through reporting services. So then you can technically go run SRS reports against that data source and look at your old information you had there. Otherwise, it's going to get recreated in the 2012 environment. Okay, hardware inventory. As we've talked about in presentations, we no longer have the SMS DefMoff file. That file goes away. We now have an SMS DefMoff, a definition that's stored in the database. But the physical file goes away. There's no more notepad modifying of this file anymore. If you have customizations that you've made to that SMS DefMoff and you want to maintain those, I think I showed you one of the presentations the other day, you can import an SMS DefMoff into this GUI interface that we have for our new SMS DefMoff, not file, but definition of the database. So you could take your old 2007 SMS DefMoff file, import it to get your customizations into our new database. So you can then turn on the reporting or turn off the reporting of the appropriate classes and attributes that you want through our new interface. So we do help you maintain that information. Now, clients, again, will recreate all that information according to your DefMoff policy that gets sent down to them, but you get the same information. Reports, again, we don't migrate over any of your reports. So it's a manual process to migrate over your reports. However, in terms of migration, we do provide for you 5 canned reports on migration. And he's got the listing of those 5 reports here for you. And if I have time, I'll show you some of those reports. Object migration jobs will show you all the individual jobs and the objects that were migrated over in those jobs. Success and failure with the status of those migration jobs. So the second one is objects included in migration jobs. So the individual software update lists, the individual OS images, the individual collections that got migrated over as opposed to just the job of success or failed, which the first report is. Objects failed to migrate. Yeah, it's obviously important to know what couldn't be migrated over. Dependencies on a 2007 collection. I'll talk about that as we get into collections here momentarily. And then clients which you said not to upgrade. You excluded from the upgrade process. Okay, so some specifics on your object migration for you. Some caveats. Boundaries. Some of the objects don't migrate over with the collection migration, such as boundaries. So some objects boundaries aren't really tied to collections where an advertisement is or a DCM baseline assignment is. So some of those you go with the object by type migration. Boundaries is one of those. So when you migrate your boundaries over from 2007, we migrate over every boundary you have in 2007 over as one blob, as I call it, over into 2012. So you don't get to pick and choose individual boundaries. You say boundary migration, we take all of them you have, bring them over, recreate boundaries in your 2012 environment. And a one-for-one mapping. We also then create boundary groups for you. We'll create multiple different boundary groups, depends upon how many DPs you have and so on. We'll create a boundary group for content lookup. So we'll put your DPs in your content lookup boundary group with the appropriate boundaries you migrated over so that your clients know how to find that SMS server that's hosting those 2007 packages. We do also create a boundary group that has site assignment turned on. And that would be for getting those clients assigned over the site. He says here that it prevents overlapping boundaries. We do actually create a boundary group now for site assignment. So you may want to turn off that site assignment boundary group or delete it so that you don't have the potential for that overlapping boundary scenario. When you do enable shared distribution points, then we create boundary groups for your DPs, as I mentioned. And I turn that on so you'll see that when we do our migration here momentarily. Software updates. Again, you have to make sure that you've set up a software update point in your 2012 environment and that you have successfully synchronized the metadata. So the metadata has to be the same between the 2 sites. If you can't get your new site to sync from the same source as your old site, the thing to do then would be use the wsus utility called wsusutil. So go to your 2007 SUP, do wsusutil export and give it a cab file name, let it dump out its metadata. Take that cab file over to your 2012 SUP and do wsusutil import of that same file, and that will import that metadata. So that way you're guaranteed you have the exact same source, your metadata source. So once you've got that done, then you can go ahead and migrate over update lists. They become software update groups. Software update deployments become deployments, and update groups, software update groups. Software update packages and your deployment templates. You can migrate those over. So you have the same infrastructure there as far as the objects for your new environment. Software distribution, we migrate classic packages or physical packages, if you want to call them that, as is, which means a package migrates over as a package. So we still have the packages node in 2012. Your standard software distribution packages become packages in 2012. Same program, same command lines, everything. By default, we will disable the advertisements for those software distribution packages as we create the deployments in 2012. That's an option in the migration job wizard you'll see coming up that you can enable or disable. By default, it's disabled. Now for AppV, if you have virtual application packages in 2007, we will migrate those over as applications in 2012 with an AppV deployment type automatically created for you. But standard software distribution packages become packages. We just don't deploy AppV packages in 2012, so we have to recreate them as applications with an AppV deployment type. But they're not deployed automatically, so you have to create your deployment for those. I mentioned in the presentation yesterday, ConfigMan 2012 only supports AppV 4.6 Service Pack 1. So before you can actually use those migrated over packages to applications, you have to have AppV 4.6 SP1 on your client computers. to be able to use that migrated over content. And then distribution point sharing is not applicable because of the change in the content store and everything. There is a conversion tool. It's kind of hard to see it in the screenshot here, but part of Microsoft that also created the physical to virtual migration, they also created a package conversion manager tool. It's actually called PCM, Package Conversion Manager. And that will allow you to take packages that have been migrated over from package to package and then convert them over from packages to applications in 2012 once you've migrated them. So that's a standalone tool that actually is available today as a CTP to open beta that you can download and play around with. Actually, take it back. The Package Conversion Manager is not available yet. It's the P2V is available for testing right now. This one is still not available yet. It hopefully will be in the next month or so for you guys. We have our top customers right now beta testing it for us. So that will allow you, again, to convert your packages over to applications. Whether they were migrated over or you just manually created packages in 2012, you can then convert them over to applications. It'll go ahead and look at your collections, look at your query rules you have, and try and recreate your query as requirement rules in the application when it creates them. So it does a very good, comprehensive job of getting those applications ready to be deployed in your environment with the appropriate rules that you want. And it has kind of its own scorecard or home page that shows you what your migration process looks like, how many total packages you had, how many have been migrated, what the status is of those. And it will actually do an analysis of all your packages to see if they're good candidates for migration over. A good candidate would be something that's like based on an MSI. But if it's a batch file, that's not going to be a good candidate to migrate over to an application because you can't really tell a batch file has been installed or not. Operating system deployment, we migrate over basically everything other than the default boot images. We don't migrate over the default boot images because there's a new wake, the Windows Automated Installation Kit. There's a new one because we have new OSs here. So we recreate or create brand new boot images in 2012 when you install it. But you can migrate over custom boot images. You just need to update the wake on them. And then all the other stuff that you've created on your own. DCM, or settings management, as we now call it. You can migrate over configuration items and baselines as long as they're interpreted. We will not migrate over anything that's uninterpreted. And basically the rule of thumb is if you can see it properly in your admin console, it's interpreted, and we should be able to migrate it over. But if it doesn't display properly when you look at configuration items or configuration baselines, if you don't see all the properties there, it was created by some tool, and we can't migrate it over likely. So as long as you create it in the console or with supported tools, then you should be able to migrate them over. You can also import configuration packs from 2007. So if you go up to our configuration pack library, the last time I looked there was like 67 or 74 different configuration packs there. You can migrate those over, and you just basically take them and import them into ConfigMan 2012. There's no real migration there. Just take your 2007 configuration packs, the cab files, and import them, and we'll change the schema from the 2007 schema to the 2012 schema. And by the way, for reference, we're just coming up on beta testing of somewhere around 8 to 10 different best practice analyzers for some of the new OSs and new and new versions of SQL Server and SharePoint and so on. So those should be coming out very, very shortly for beta testing for the 2007 environment. Content migration, one of the big things you need to make sure you do is, I told you we migrate over packages as is. If your packages currently use a hard-coded source path of d:\myapps, when you migrate that package over, we keep that same source path, d:\myapps. Well, you're on different hardware now, so you're probably not going to be that d:\myapps. It's probably not going to be valid for that content. So it's highly recommended that right today, you guys start migrating over all your source files over to UNC shares. So migrate over the UNCs so that when you migrate over the package, that UNC path is still valid for you. From there, you'll see when we go through the wizard here momentarily. How much time do I got? I got 20 minutes. Plenty of time. I can talk slower now. No, I can't. I can for about 10 seconds and I get going again. Sorry. This is the way I am. When you migrate over your content, we'll ask you, what is going to be the owning site in ConfigMan 2012 for this content? And what you're going to do there, you're going to pick the site that's closest to the 2007 source files. Because when you now pull those source files over, that site server is going to be the one that goes across the WAN over to wherever your source UNC path is to find those files. So you'll see that in the wizard coming up. That way you'll be able to find those source files most effectively, get them in your 2012 environment, and then distribute them to appropriate DPs in your 2012 environment. Other objects, we migrate over asset intelligence customization, so again, classifications, families, labels, hardware requirements, and so on, software metering rules, and search and administrative folders. So we do migrate over any search folders you created as well as your admin created folders. If you've played around the labs, you've noticed that we now have folders in most everywhere in the console now, collections and applications and so on. So you can create folders for your administrative duties, for separating your objects from other administrators. So everybody keep their things separate. And you can migrate those over if you wish. And that'll be an option. Report migration, I already mentioned we don't migrate them over. So get them into SRS today, and then export them to RDL, and then import the RDL into your SRS directly outside of Configuration Manager. So start using SRS today in your ConfigMan 2007 environment so you're familiar with it. Okay, let's go back over to demo and let's do some migration jobs. All right, so again, here's what our environment looks like. We've got these 90 different objects that have been discovered. Oh, you guys want to see, do you? Okay. A black screen's not good enough for you, a blue screen's not good enough for you. Okay, you guys are demanding. Wow. So here's our migration. Again, we have 90 objects sitting here that have not been migrated. So 0, 0, and 90. So we're going to create a migration job. Well, I'm going to create a couple different migration jobs. I have none by default. We're going to go ahead and create one. And we'll say objects used by config manager. It doesn't matter if I type the name wrong here. Clients collection. And I'm going to say migrate by collection, but there's also object migration and then objects migrated after, modified after migration. So I'll create the first two types. So I'll do this one. And now what we're going to do is go through a listing and show you all the different collections that are available from the 2007 environment. We're not querying your 2007 environment. This is based on that data gathering process we completed earlier. So this is current as of the last time your site server did a data gathering process from 2007. So it shows you all the collections. It shows you the source site code. TST is my 2007 site server. Tells you whether it's a user or device collection. And it tells you whether it's been migrated or not yet. In this case, none of mine have been migrated. I'm going to select the collection where my clients are, as well as this collection that is a root collection with two sub-collections to show you that what happens with sub-collections. We don't do sub-collections anymore in 2012. So I'm going to show you what happens with sub-collections. Now, there's this button up here that's very big and it's grayed out that says View Collections that cannot migrate. You may have collections in your environment that you cannot migrate over to ConfigMan 2012. And I've got a slide on that that will explain the 3 different scenarios where they can't be. If you have any of those, this button will illuminate. You can click the button and it will tell you what the collection name is and why it cannot be migrated. The most common example is going to be you've mixed users and devices in a single collection. And we don't support that in 2012, so we're not going to migrate that collection over. Or maybe it's a single collection that's limited to 2 different collections. Kind of got parent relationships, links to 2 different ones, and so on. So I don't have any issues there, so I'll go ahead and take those 2 collections. And now what we're going through is looking to find all the objects that are targeted to those 2 collections. Or actually, there's 4 collections. ConfigMan clients, main building, floor 1 and floor 2, as those 2 sub-collections. And these are the objects we found that were targeted to any of those 4 different collections. It says there's 3 advertisements, 3 packages, a couple software update deployments, and a couple of packages, 2 baselines, and 4 configuration items. So we selected these automatically. We show you the, again, source site code, where they come from, and whether or not they've been migrated already. And you have a picker here. You can say, I don't think I want that packet or that advertisement brought over. It doesn't make sense to bring it over. Now, in this case, if you guys, I'm sure a number of you recognize what that is, KB977384. That's the hotfix for ConfigMan 2007 R3 if you want to do power management. Well, we're migrating the clients over to ConfigMan 2012 clients, so this hotfix is immaterial. So it doesn't make sense to bring this advertisement over because we don't want to deploy it to 2012 clients. So I'm going to clear that. Which also then means that I probably don't need the package for that same advertisement. I don't need the package for that KB because I'm not going to deploy it in 2012 environment. But I do want the 2 software update deployments and the packages for those. I got the 2 baselines, and I'm going to go to configuration items. And I don't want to migrate over the SCCM client configuration item. And the reason I don't want to migrate it over is it's going to report non-compliance in my 2012 environment. This is the configuration item I created that looks to see is the config-man client installed in the proper location, which is C:\Windows System32 CCM. We do not install clients there anymore in 2012. We install our clients now in C:\Windows CCM because now we're native client. We don't have to worry about the 64-bit versus 32-bit, so all clients install by default in the C:\Windows CCM. So this baseline and CI would report everything is invalid, as non-compliant. So I'm not going to bring it over. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this item, but it says, wait a minute, if you don't migrate over the configuration item, I can't migrate over the configuration baseline that item is used by, because the baseline would be empty. So it automatically is going to cancel the selection for that configuration baseline. So now we're only going to migrate over one of those 2 baselines. The same thing would have happened if I would have went and turned off the package first. Then it would have said, I can't migrate the advertisement if the package isn't migrated. So we know the relationship between those. So that's all I want, so I'll go ahead and click Next. So here's the assigning ownership of content. This says I'm going to be migrating over some packages. Packages have source files. When I migrate, if I choose to migrate over the content for those source files, which site server do I want to use as the site server to go to the source path and get those files? So I can go over to my 2012 environment, and I can pick and choose any one of my 3 sites, my central administration site or my 2 primary sites. So I figure out which one is the closest to where those source files happen to be. And I'll go ahead and say it's PR1. So really all that is to give me the closest server to the source file so there's less impact on the WAN when we do choose to migrate over that content. Okay, security scope. Everything in config-man 2012 has security based on it, so you have to assign the scope of who owns these objects or who can view them. And I don't have any other scopes created, so I'll just go with the default, but you can certainly say these are all owned by the workstations team as opposed to the server team, so I'll put them in the workstation scope. But I only have the default scope, so I'll click that. Although you can create a security scope at this point if you want. Collection limiting. So you guys know from previous presentations in the labs that all collections now in 2012 are limited to another collection. So you always have a hard stop on what amount of objects you can look at by whatever your limited collection is. 2007 didn't require that. So you may have collections that are in 2007 that are limited to a specific collection that may not get migrated over. So that may then increase the scope of the clients in your collection you do migrate over. So if I had any collections in that scenario, it would show me the collection saying this collection very likely is going to increase in scope, which means it may have had 10 members in 2007. It might have 10,000 members in 2012 just because of the way collections are differentiated. So it'd have to then say, okay, limit this collection from 2007 to this existing collection in 2012. So I limit the scope of what that new collection can pull from. And I don't have any that are limited in that manner that's going to cause a problem. But we would show you those here if there were any. Site code replacement. This is also for collections. This is if I had any collections based on a query rule, and that query rule was based on my site code. We're doing side-by-side migration, so I have to have brand new site codes. You cannot reuse your site codes in a migration from 2007 to 2012. Well, actually, you can, and that's when you do a flatten and reload. So you flatten your 2007 site, and you reinstall 2012 on top of it using the same site code. Then you can. But if you're doing the side-by-side migration, you can't migrate over to the same site code. So you're going from ABC to XYZ. So this gives you the opportunity of correcting the site code mistakes that you made in your existing environment. That's the positive spin you put on this, that you can't reuse your site codes. So this option is saying, here are all the collections that have queries that are based on a site code that's not going to be valid anymore in 2012. So if I had any collections that way, it would show me the old site code and then let me pick and choose what site code I want to replace that query with. If it was TST before, it will now be PR1 or PR2 or CAS, whatever the case happens to be, and I don't have any. Review information. There's a lot of information here. You can't view it all at one time, so you probably want to save it to a text file and then call it something like C:client migration. And then that goes ahead and creates that file for you. I hate the screen resolution. We'll go down here and get to Explorer. And then in the rooted drive C, I've got this ASCII text file called client migration. I can go ahead and print this off and have it available for, and going through my lab, testing things out, I would go ahead and take this, print it out, and probably take it into some other editor other than Notepad so you can read it better. Notepad's great for log files, but it isn't necessarily great for these big, long things here. So you have that information as to what we're going to do in the migration process. Okay, I've done that. I know everything it's going to do, so I click Next. And now lastly is, when do you want the migration job to run? The default is to run the migration job as soon as I finish the wizard. Otherwise, I can say, don't run it at all. Just create it and don't run it. I'll manually kick it off when I want to, the top option. The bottom option is schedule it to run later on. I want to create it now. I want to have it run at midnight when there's fewer people on the network and on the server, so less impact on other people. So I can schedule that. Then is, in the middle section is, if I have a conflicting object. So let's say I tried to migrate over the All Systems collection from 2007. There already is an All Systems collection in 2012. What do I do then? The default is don't migrate over an old object if it already exists in the new environment. Or I can change the bottom checkbox and says, go ahead and replace the existing object with a migrated object. That would be the default option when you do a migration of remigrate jobs or items that have already been migrated over. You would do that. And then down at the very bottom, two options. Transfer the organizational folder structure over from 2007 to 2012. So migrate over my admin created folders, if I had any, for the collections or for the reports or for, I guess reports we don't migrate over, but packages, whatever. So migrate over any folders that are impacted here. And the bottom option, enable advertisements when they get migrated over to deployments. And the default is not. So the program would be disabled. So I'll go ahead and leave the defaults on all those. Summary tells me what's going to happen. I click Next. It creates my migration job. My migration job is off and running now. So here we have our migration job. It says not started. I click Refresh. And now it should say running. It says running. I can then, to monitor this, I could go run the report, or I could just go to Objects in Job, and it shows me all the objects in this migration job and what their status is. Currently, they all say available to migrate when I hit Refresh. Now I have some that have already been migrated. Sometimes you'll catch one, the bottom one, running. So it's currently migrating one of those objects, and it's already migrated some of the objects. So we'll let that guy go because I'm starting to get short on time. I'm probably not going to meet my goal of finishing this thing, but so I'll create another migration job real quick. Objects, not going to get any more fancy than that. I'll do object migration, and now it just shows me my dump of all the objects I have available to me. And I'll take boundaries. You can see it's going to migrate one. I'll take AppV packages. I'll take Asset Intelligence Catalog customizations and my software list. I'll just take those. But you can see operating system deployments, software update deployments, templates, and so on. I can migrate over everything. If I look at my packages, here it shows that 2 of them have been migrated already. 1 has been excluded. Excluded means I turned it off before. I probably don't want to migrate it over in the future. So I'll just say next, next, and security scope. Oops, I didn't want to create one. I wanted to go next. And then I would save that to a file, but I'm not going to. Basically tell you AppV packages become applications with an AppV deployment type, and that we don't deploy them automatically. And I'll run the job right now. So let that guy go. We'll refresh this one and see what our status is. And this one is completed. So if we go back to our home page now and look at our home page, he says we have migrated over 16 objects, 4 were excluded. The excluded ones were the ones I disabled in the console. And I can see those anytime I want to from the home and then edit exclusion list. It shows me these 4 objects. Once I exclude them once, it assumes I won't want to migrate them over in the future, although I can manually select them, or I can say, yeah, I probably do want to take this baseline in the future so I can remove it from my list if I want to. Do I want to save my changes? No. Okay. So that guy's migrating, and he's still running. We can see how he's going along. It takes a little bit longer to migrate over the app V packages into applications. So, oh, he's done. Okay. So now my scorecard should say I've migrated a whole bunch of stuff over. Migrated over 26 objects. So getting a little bit more of the darker blue in there. Alrighty. So let's go back over to get a couple more slides, and we'll get our client migrated over. Our collections, I'll show you what happened with collections. We no longer have sub-collections. Sub-collections go away. So all you have is collections now. But what we do is we preserve your existing relationship. So here's a collection Redmond with two buildings, Building 41, Building 44 as sub-collections. What we would do then is in the collections node, we actually create an administrative folder called Redmond. So your root collection that is empty becomes an administrative folder in collections node. And then we would create those two collections, B41 and B44, as collections inside that folder, Redmond. And in my scenario, I'll create a folder called main building, and inside the main building folder, it will be the floor 1 and floor 2 collections. In my case, it got migrated over. So folder structure gets migrated over. So we'll keep the limiting to. So basically, any of your root folders or root collections become folders if they have things linked to them or child sub-collections underneath them. Preventing collection scope increase, we saw that. We'll pop up and say, hey, this collection might increase in size now because of the fact that the collection it was limited to is not there anymore. We don't want to go to all systems, so how do you want to limit it? And this is the screen that we saw in the wizard. And the collections you can't migrate over. User and device resources mixed in a single collection. Sub-collections linked to different types. So a sub-collection that's devices that's going to a parent that is for users. We can't migrate that over. Or collections with limit to queries to multiple different collections. We can't migrate those over. And there's the report that would show you, hey, I can't migrate this collection over because it is mixed query collection. Direct membership rules will be migrated as is. We maintain the client GUID, so we know what the client is, so we'll maintain those. Collections which are limited to multiple collections, that's again, we'll request that you go ahead and specify a collection limiting scenario. And then the collections with site code queries in them, we'll ask you to change the site code reference. And we've looked at that in the wizard. Okay, before I get to my examples, let's go back over here and look and see what happened, because I'm 2.5 minutes. So let me go show you what happened there with the collections as long as we're talking about them. I'll go over here. I'll go to my device collections. There's my config-man clients collection. When I pull this down for you so you can see it, there's config-man clients. It has no members because it was the query actually looks for version 4.0 clients. And these are now 5.0 clients. I don't have any 4.0 clients in my 2012 environment. But now we have a folder called main building. And in the main building, we have the floor 1 collection and the floor 2 collection, which were sub-collections before. Now they're the regular collections. And you can see that, if you remember, in the 2012 environment, had 1 and 2 members respectively. They're query-based, and I'm showing you all the appropriate members off the query in my current site. For our software library, we migrated over these 2 applications, which were now app V applications, so app V deployment type technology. And then I migrated over a couple of packages. They came over as packages. Same 6 programs as they had in config-man 2007. Software updates, here's my update groups. Migrated over 2 of those. Migrated over 2 deployment packages. Those update groups have deployments on them. So here's the deployment for them. Oh, if I go back and show you the packages, go to DC authoring tools, the program, per system unattended. And the advanced tab is disabled. So we've disabled the program, so it's not going to automatically deploy this even though it's got a deployment. So it's got a deployment here, which is basically the advertisement created as a deployment. It's been disabled because the program's been disabled, just like you can do in 2007. And then in boundaries, it migrated over 2 boundaries, this IP address range here, 3.50, and this 80 site. These came from 2007. And it created 2 boundary groups for me. One boundary group for the distribution point. If I look at the properties, you'll see it's a content only, so it's not used for site assignment. It has my DP in it, because I did the share DP. And it has my 2 boundaries that got migrated over. And then it created another boundary group for site assignment, which you may want to turn this off if it's going to cause overlapping boundary scenarios. So you may want to turn this off or delete that boundary group entirely. So that's just a quick look at the stuff that got migrated over. I'm 6 seconds over. It's a bummer. I wanted to be able to finish a presentation for a change. So I guess I'm not going to, because they're going to kick me out of here momentarily. So last thing I'll do is let me go ahead and kick off a client upgrade, and that'll be it. I'll just show you client upgrade real quick. I'm just going to do a client push. So here's my device collection. If I go to all systems and show members, here's my client, SMS client. So this is the one that got migrated over. Let me show you the properties real quick, show you something new. Agent name, SMS Migration Manager. We created this object as a DCR from the migration process. That discovery process created this basically a DDR, and it came from, instead of heartbeat discovery, it came from the migration process. So what I would do is go here, go install client. I would say reinstall, and I'm going to install from the primary site PR1 because I'm at the CAS. And that will go ahead and do a client push over that client computer. I'll warn you what you guys want to do in preparation for migrating clients. ConfigMan 2012 clients require .NET 4.0 client framework. That's a requirement now. It's a long install. I would recommend that you pre-deploy .NET 4.0 client framework today or sometime before you get to migration. Otherwise, this is going to take about a half an hour to migrate this client, because .NET takes about 20 minutes itself to install in this slow XP VM that I have. So pre-deploy .NET 4.0 client framework, because it also requires a reboot, and by the time you guys really get to migration, you'll have that already there, and your deployment will be very quickly as far as your client. We'll install Silverlight, which is very, very small and very quick installation. So with that, I guess I better stop. Let me punch up a couple slides, go to the very end here, a whole bunch of stuff that you guys will see never. At least not from me, unless you watch really fast. I just want to get to the last couple of slides on yeah, this is going hierarchy, so it takes a while. I apologize that I can't ever get through a presentation. I've done this presentation before, and I've actually completed it. But I've had 3 hours. No, it wasn't that long. Okay, here's my 2 slides on. Prepare. Get to ConfigMan 2007 SP2. You got to be there. And not really as a minimum, that's where you have to be. There's no SP3. Flatten your hierarchy, so start flattening your hierarchy. Get your new hardware, Windows Server 2008, probably R2, 64-bit, SQL 2008, 64-bit. Look at branch cache in those remote scenarios where you got plenty of bandwidth. And then consider virtualizing your infrastructure. And then lastly, get rid of your collections that have mixed environments. So get rid of those collections and change all your source paths over from hard-coded paths, local paths, to UNCs so that you can have the ability of using that content. And lastly, come up with some new site codes that you're very fond of, because you're going to be creating them. With that, I'll stop chatting. Thank you all for being here. Hopefully you had a great week and learned a lot.